If you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you do read it, you're misinformed. What is the long-term effect of too much information?
Information, I just need some information. I've been dying. Is it lack of education? I've been reading without any transformation. I'm addicted. Is it overstimulation? Hey.
Welcome to the Sixth Sense Report.
Welcome to Beyond Culture. I'm your host, Yvan. Today, I'm here with my co-host, Abel. This is an interesting episode. Today, we have two special guests in the building from the Sixth Sense Reports, Darnell and Joel.
Yeah.
What's going on, Yvan? What's up, Abel?
Welcome.
Not much.
What's good?
You know what? I have to give you guys some credit here. Like, you guys are honestly for me at least, you guys are the OG podcast. Like, when you guys started doing your podcast back in the day, when you guys started, I'm not calling you guys older heads, but like when you guys started doing the podcast back in the day and you told me about it, Darnell, I'm like, at that point, I'm like, yo, what is a podcast? Like, what is all this? And what's the point of doing all of this? So, and then you guys, and fast forward to now, like I'm deeper in the game than before. I kind of understand it more, but like I have to give a lot of credit to you guys. You guys really opened my eyes to the potential of what a podcast could be.
Wow. Well, thanks, man. It's just one of those things where, we kind of just jumped on it as well. And it's good to see how well you guys are doing with Beyond Culture and you and Abel and touching all these different topics.
I was wondering, for the people who don't know, I kind of know a bit, but also how did Sixth Sense Reports kind of begin, and what is Sixth Sense Reports? What is it about? The major thing I love about you guys, other than your content, is also you have the best catchphrase I think I've ever heard of a show of all time. Like
Sixth Sense makes change. That's all Darnell.
Bars. So yeah, tell us a bit about the show, man. What is it about?
Well, the Sixth Sense makes change. That's me in my old rapper days. I'm not a rapper anymore. I'm a journalist / theologian economist. But the Sixth Sense Report is a weekly podcast that reports on events related to Canadians from an economic and theological perspective.
And we just so happened. Basically, I'm an accountant by trade, if you want to call it that. And so every year we've always kind of taken off, let's call the beginning of the year. March and April is like crazy time for me, just doing tax returns for friends and family. It's just, I have no personal time basically. And so we always just kind of take a break. And I actually look at it like, to some extent, a blessing, because we'd probably have 10 episodes on COVID right now. And I'd be so tired of talking about it.
But I would also add, like, one of the reasons why we got started was Joel wanted to do a podcast on his own and I wanted to do one on my own. And essentially, Joel and I were, in God's providence, we were just talking one day and Joel's like, yo, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I said, you are? I'm like, so am I. And the things that we wanted to do a podcast on, they overlapped. And so, and you guys, you and Abel know, it's easier to create content together than carry a show on your own.
For sure.
Right. So Joel and I, though me and Joel and I are alike because we're both Christians, we're different in the way we interpret information and what our specialties are. All right. So Joel, what would you explain? What do you bring to the show? Or actually, you know what? No, scrap that.
Okay.
Let's flip it. You tell me what I bring to the show and I'll tell you what you bring to the show.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah. So, I think Darnell has he definitely has that journalistic approach. There's very much, I think so much of our episodes have really good groundwork and foundation because Darnell does his homework, not just on what does he need to know, but how do I set this topic up for the audience? I'm a different thinker to some extent than Darnell. And so we, compare and contrast with each other really well. And then I think Darnell also has a really good ability to part of his setting up the content is because he can perceive sort of where the audience is really well. And so tailoring, the structure of our episode or what topics. I think that's really a part of the show where Darnell contributes so much. Is even I would say without him, half the stuff we talk about, I wouldn't even have thought to talk about. Like the one that always comes to mind as like the most random, but one of our best episodes was brown privilege.
Oh yeah. Brown privilege.
I would have never thought to talk about this. You like at all.
But it's a real thing, man.
Well, I mean, we use brown privilege just as the title is interesting, but the content we were actually talking about, essentially, the community side of to some extent, Sikhs, but not just Sikhs. Obviously, that's why we use the term brown privilege to be a little bit more generic, but just hashing through that aspect of politics. That's really, I think Darnell just has a really good pulse of, what topics we should address.
Yeah, I would say for Joel, I think Joel was born to podcast, I think. And that's not me, gassing him up. But I think like certain people are very good at talking, not necessarily saying Joel's talking a lot, but Joel is principled in his thoughts. So he's always he's able to approach topics without preparation, because in his mind, everything is structured, everything is principled, everything is in logical order. So he's able to interpret things very, very quickly. Now, for me, I'm not good at that. Like if somebody comes and throws a question at me off the cuff, I'm likely not to answer because I'm going to speak out of turn. But Joel does a very good job of being structured and being very principled in his approach. And I think this is the key thing too, that even the audience likes about Joel, is that he's consistent. He's always consistent and he sticks by his guns, even though people will disagree with him or might not like what he has to say. But I can promise you this, you listen to Joel, you will learn something that you never believed or that you never understood before. And that's what he brings. He brings definitely the economic aspect. I bring more so the theological aspect. He brings the hockey, I bring the basketball. Yeah, and that's what we do.
Yeah, it's funny as you were saying that it resonates. One of the things I want to say I pride myself on, or I kind of think I'm good at with regards to my work, is problem solving. And I think so much of that is just taking information and what Darnell said, like I'm principled because I go, okay, what are the foundational things that I know that apply? And I just try, and I would say I can process on the fly to some extent. So most of the podcasts, or not most, but some of the times in the podcast, I'm just talking through I'm applying the principle to the subject and what are the logical implications? If it takes me a place that I don't like let's say as a Christian to say, from a principled libertarian perspective, making prostitution legal I'm personally at attention there. I might think something is immoral, but my principles say, well, does that inherently mean I should make it illegal?
Yeah, so Yvan and Abel, like that's what Joel and I do. And part of it is our niche market, or our audience is people who are Canadian, who are Christian, and who are economic in their thinking. And not just Christian, because like the joke is like we're Christians, but our content could be offensive to a lot of Christians.
I was just gonna say that.
All right, because sometimes we got swearing on the show, and sometimes we like for example, David Lynn, getting arrested, the street preacher from Toronto. Now I made comments about him getting arrested and agreeing with him being arrested. Well, that's not the Christian thing to say. Like how, right? And so, that kind of got me in some kind of trouble. But I mean, I wasn't trying to be controversial. I was trying to be biblical. And irrespective of what Christians think, Christianity is not the definition of truth. The scriptures are. So, but anyways, yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Yeah. And I guess for our audience who's going to get this, how would you guys, whether it's doing what me and Darnell did and talk about what each other brings to the show, but just, how would you encapsulate what you guys do and your goal even as for your podcast?
So Yvan, what does Abel bring to the table? And Abel, what does Yvan bring to the table?
Okay, well, I'll start because Abel will probably agree on this too. But there was a moment like a few years ago, I believe it's might have been in 2018 or so. We all met together, all the boys, obviously, because we all go off to university. So we kind of we don't see each other as often as we'd want to. We're all from Toronto, but we go to different universities. So we were all at a restaurant, and then Abel and I just started going off talking about politics to the point where our friends started talking about basketball on one side, and we were talking about politics because we were so deep into it. And that's kind of when I already in my head, like the idea of doing a podcast on politics was kind of already in my head, but it hadn't been until Abel kind of reached out to me about it during this, just like you guys, like around that time too. I was thinking about doing a more broad podcast with some other guys, and Abel kind of brought me the idea of, yo, let's get a politics podcast going. We already seen the potential we have when we both have conversations. So when then you get into our episodes and you kind of listen to them, what you'll see and you'll hear that Abel brings to the table, he's very much so, he's kind of turned into like an academic. The way he speaks and the way he structures his points and etc., they're all based on the amount of readings he's done, and obviously life experiences and growing up in Toronto, etc., that plays into his arguments as well. But he reads a lot. Like you'll see if you listen to the podcast, like he reads a lot. So I think just his foundation and his arguments, and also he doesn't really rush. I think that's a very good quality. He doesn't rush to any type of judgment. So at times when I'll ask him for his opinion on something, he won't mind saying like, look, well, I'm not sure about this right now, but I'll definitely come back to you and then we could talk about this. So I think that's really what Abel brings to the Beyond Culture podcast. And also it being Beyond Culture, we kind of felt like, obviously us being younger, our audience being much younger, we kind of only focus in on the things at a surface level, whether it's music, pop culture, or sports, or even politics. Politics, we just really look at the surface level. We're like, yo, OSAP. If it's not OSAP, I don't care about politics or whatever. That's really how like people always think. So I think what we try to do Beyond Culture is to go deeper into politics and kind of try to bridge that gap that we have between culture and politics.
Yeah, for sure. And if I can pick it up from there, since like our mission is to kind of bridge the gap between culture and politics, meaning that we want to be able to relate to our audience how politics affects our culture and how our culture affects our politics, the two-way street there. And as Yvan mentioned, our audience and our, I suppose, target audience is the young adult demographics. So the limitation, I guess the limitation or the focus there is that we cannot be too academic or too theoretical in our conversations about politics or whatever it may be, because many of the people that we're talking to or are listening to us don't have the life experience and the expertise to kind of delve deep into these issues. And the same applies for us. We're still doing our undergrads, and so in like going from there, the thing that Yvan brings to the table is that first of all, he's more well versed on the culture side than I am. I'm more into the political side. My degree is political science and philosophy. So I find myself oftentimes not knowing a lot about what if we have an upcoming episode about the cultural issues, not knowing a lot about them. And like from that sense, Yvan really stimulates my curiosity there. And like one of the most important quality about Yvan is how thorough and rigorous he is in his research and his thinking about political issues. Is I do political science, so I expect, if I'm talking to someone who's doing political science, I expect him or her knowing much more about these, about politics or political science than, I would expect someone who's doing, who's in business, as Yvan is in business marketing. But sometimes I'm really just astounded by how well he knows these things and how well he can analyze these political topics, so I think that mix there and is quite important for a podcast where you have multiple guests. And I can throw back this compliment back to you guys listening to your episodes. I find it really fascinating how Joel is really the economics guy, quantitative and sharp, sharp as a knife, and really argumentative, and and Darnell on the other side, he's more, much more interpersonal and, bringing, as you said, the Christian perspective there. And, just that combination there is what makes, I think, what makes our podcast interesting for our audiences.
It's a funny, so when Darnell was talking about a podcast, I sent him a video and I said, I want to make a podcast called I Want to Argue With You. So for you to say I'm argumentative, it's not necessarily surprising.
Yeah. So now dealing with this COVID situation and interpreting, what's going on in the culture. And I guess that's why we're here. Well, not I guess, but that's why we're having this conversation. And especially when it comes to interpreting information in the infodemic that we're having, is some news people have coined the term. Joel, what has been one of your approach to this whole thing with COVID and understanding what exactly is going on, because there's been just so much information and being inundated wherever we go, from our phones to our TVs and so forth.
I think this might sound ridiculous, but the primary thing that's helped me is not watching mainstream news. It's almost, you can almost tell who researches for themselves, who watches or listens to podcasts as a means to obtain their news, and who just, is sitting at home watching CP24 getting their government check. And I say that just because there seems to be a complete lack of nuance in so much of the conversation. So for me, I'm critical of everything, and I think that's, in terms of this, as you called it, the infodemic, right? Where we're just bombarded. There's so much information out there. How do you determine, who to trust, who not to trust, or if you're reading a sketchy source, when is it something you can actually rely on, or something that you're like, okay, this is just hot garbage. And I would say that to you guys, how do you, with regards to all of this, I know, my point essentially is that I've looked in a million different places, and I've found, different friends on Facebook that I didn't, that I had, but I didn't realize, had such a really well way of approaching topics, that I start, following them more. I have them on whatever it's called, starred, so they show up first in my feed or something like that. So, Darnell, I would say for all of, what are your guys' thoughts on how have you approached, getting information, and have you felt overwhelmed with the quantity?
It's bizarre. I don't know. Looking, I suppose for me, it has always been the case that there's a lot of information coming in, especially since the coronavirus interplays a lot with the political sides, because obviously it's important to know what we're doing collectively in response to the pandemic, right? So I guess for many people who don't follow politics as much, staying at home and starting to having nothing to do, having less to do and being more on our phones and watching more news and that kind of stuff is, you can see that there's suppose an increase in the information you're getting. But for myself, I haven't found it too much different because and I suppose it is a problem because, and I talked to Yvan about this, and that's why I closed my Twitter account, because there was just too much information. I couldn't process it, and it was just a bit insane. And yeah. So, but about finding like what to read and like how to kind of manage the inflow of information, my approach is always to try to stay informed for sure about what's happening on the daily scale. So since I'm in Canada, always I tried as much as possible to make sure I know what's going on in the Parliament, the federal Parliament, and at the Ontario level as well. I also which means now, because the Parliament is not working as it used to before, we have much of the attention is on the executive. So I try to pay attention to what the executive is doing, but also I try to have a long-term view of things, and that's why I try to just on my personal read about the topics that are more long-term or mid to long-term, such as, all the conversation about inequality. And I think you guys did an episode of this, wealth and income inequality and, climate change and all those, those broad patterns that perhaps aren't as immediate or aren't as reflected in the immediate life, but which are quite important, So, and the other thing too is, as Joel mentioned about mainstream media. Yeah, the incentives for mainstream media aren't quite aligned with informing people. It's that's why we've seen mainstream media become so much reactive and really partisan. So, I suppose the advice there is just watch as little as you can, and I find that reading articles or even academic papers, although academic papers are produced with they're not produced as often or as quickly as articles or op-eds, I find that more informative.
Mm-hmm. And to piggyback off what Abel just said, I think following politics for the past, I would say 2 years kind of has prepared me, and I'm sure you guys as well, to kind of intake information for this pandemic, because it's kind of weird to say that a pandemic became political, but it became political pretty quickly. You obviously have argument on both sides about we should reopen, we should stay closed down, and et cetera, and kind of both sides have been blaming castigating each other as you're less moral than I am because I chose this position, and etc. So things like that have really following politics for the past 2 years kind of have prepared me for this situation, because the way I intake information is I read articles, but mainly also when it comes to watching network television, I will watch everything. I will go from watching the ladies of The View to watching Andrew Cuomo on CNN to watching Chris Wallace on Fox News, and then I will go to listening to podcasts. So whether it's Joe Rogan, even Ben Shapiro, and it's a grueling task to kind of do all of this. But for me, it's not really, I don't see it as a task, because it's how I wake up and go about my day. I kind of try to get information from as much places as I can, and then I kind of try to formulate my own ideas on what's going on. And one thing I learned though during this pandemic, which was something I had never thought about before, because obviously I've never been in a pandemic, but it was the fact that Abel kind of spoke about this as well, is now we have health officials that are on TV And oftentimes, as Darnell, you all know, as a journalist, your job is to find the answers, probe, and probe, right? But when it comes to health and a pandemic, sometimes they don't have the answers right now because we're either going off previous models or we're kind of waiting to see how this is going to react, especially because of the nature of COVID-19, how you have a longer incubation period. So sometimes you don't see the trend line as of today and you don't see the effects of certain events, right? So it's one of those where I've learned, like, okay, I listened to the Anthony Fauci's, Dr. Birx, and also for us here in Canada, you have Dr. Tam, you have also the Ontario medical officer. I forgot what her name. I think it's the Vila or something like that. I listen to them, but I also, when they can't give me a certain answer I'm looking for, obviously I'm not the one asking questions, but when they can't give me certain answers, I accept that. And it's a hard thing to do, but I accept the fact that, look, they don't have the answer. It's not like they don't want to give me the answer. It's just that the nature of the time we're in right now, the answers aren't going to always be there. We have to kind of be okay with that as the public.
Yeah, I think for me, like, so my major in school when I was at Tyndale was history. So as a history major, especially at a Christian school, you're looking at everything as all history is God's history. History starts from God speaking the world into existence to the way we're living out our life today. So for me, it was just more so like, okay, I'm interpreting the world that I live in through my worldview as a Christian. So like I have not been reading or watching anything. I went to England in March, and then I came back. So I went to England for 2 weeks. So the first week I went there, that's when Trudeau told everybody to come home. And so my trip was cut short by a week. And I came home and, I came home to like a different country. And when I came home, I didn't read anything. I didn't watch anything. As soon as I got to the airport, they just gave me my documents and they said, okay, look, stay in isolation for 2 weeks. And so that whole time I have just been using the time as, not to sound like a pastor, but use the time as, this time as a stepping stone and not a stumbling block. So I'm reading the book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. So it's a story of success, and outliers are just unique situations that happened. So as a historian, this is a unique situation that has happened in history. We've never been on quarantine before, or the whole world hasn't been on quarantine before. So there's a lot of downtime, right? So the way my mind works is I only put my mind towards things I have control over, right? So I don't have control over what happens in the hospitals, what happens in government. I have control over how big my stomach gets. I have control over how my wife feels about me, so I should spend some time with her, right? I have control over how well the content of Sixth Sense Report is when we come back, and that's all I've been focusing on. So the short answer is this: so like in behavioral economics, which is psychology and economics coming together, I've been practicing rational ignorance. So rational ignorance meaning that it like not so much that I'm depending on the media for information, but that it's taking too much of my time, like cost benefit analysis. It takes too much of my time. It's not worth my time for me to go study and look up the numbers. That's what Joel's for, right? That's why Joel gets paid the big bucks. I'm not gonna, I'll take a look at an article or two, but not until I have to, not until, it's time to go to air and do all those things. So yeah, so just for me, it's more beneficial for me to not look at the information and rather do something that's a bit more beneficial for me, like work out, eat, watch Netflix,
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think I know as you were saying that, I was thinking about myself, and I can only imagine for everybody else, like the news and the constant news is literally just a catalyst for stress.
Yes.
And I think I wonder how many people are engaging in conversations about COVID literally in a fight or flight sort of.
Well, see,
mode.
but that's the thing I've been noticing is that, and I'm sure you guys have also been noticing the outright fear that we see among people. And again, I guess, for me as a Christian, I understand that, the ultimate power that Satan had was the fear of death. Christ comes, gets rid of that. So I don't fear death. I'm not wearing a mask when I go outside. I'm not doing that. Now, if you feel convicted, I'm not saying this is a biblical thing. Like if you feel your conscience is telling you like, okay, you know what, I need to put on a mask and so forth and all that, more power to you. But for me, I'm going to the beach. I'm going to go play basketball. I'm going to go work out because God is sovereign. Like it is appointed for every man to die once and then face judgment. So we were on the plane in England, on our way to England, right? So I'm sure my wife won't mind me telling this story. So she had the mask on. So she had her mask and she was ready because she was a bit nervous about going on the flight as this pandemic was getting hotter. And she was getting a lot of information from friends and family telling her not to go. So we went and she had her mask on. And so she has her mask on. And a couple people on the plane had their masks on. And then, Tyra took it off because it just got uncomfortable. It got hot. It kind of got wet, kind of got sweaty. And she took it off. And she says, you know what, Darnell? This is too much. Like, if I take it off, am I gonna catch corona? If I put it back on, this is not practical for me to walk around with a mask on the whole time. If it's God's decree that as soon as I take that off and somebody walks by and sneezes on me, I'm dead. So what am I, I can't, I'm on vacation. I can't be, the movie like Final Destination, looking around every corner for death. Like that's not for Christians. We've already dealt with the whole death thing. We know where we're going. You know what I mean? So more times though, you just enjoy the time you have, breathe the air, go outside and breathe the air, take the mask off and breathe the air. When you're hanging around people, fine, put the mask on. But breathe the air, man. God made the air. It's fresh. It's clean. It feels good. No? Come on, guys. Like for you guys that were locked up and then you go outside and you breathe the air. It's nice, no?
Yeah, still. First time I went outside, I had a headache though.
Yeah.
It's different out here.
So I guess what is your response been then? Like, I mean, you're both still in school. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're both in school.
So, I mean, are you on campus res or off campus res or some hybrid of something?
We're both, well, for me, I came home around March because they had already made all the classes online. So I'm like, okay, there's no point of me being in res. Might as well go back home to Toronto. So now I'm back home in Toronto. So with my family.
Yeah. For me, I was off res anyways, and I was living with my family in Ottawa, although I'm from Toronto. But so I'm still in Ottawa, living off res. But if I can speak a bit to what Darnell was talking about there, although I'm probably not a big believer as you guys, as big of a believer as you guys, but I suppose the thing we have in common is that I think there's I don't know if I would say societal pressure but there's definitely this tendency to try to be, to define productivity in the sense of during the quarantine, in the sense of, reading as many books as possible, or reading the as many articles, or watching the news and being super informed about what's going on. But I think that this is also an opportunity for people just to, take a step back and enjoy their families, be around, and talk to the friends you haven't talked to in a long while, to pick up a phone and just call the people that you love, and those kind of things, so, and in that sense, although I can't, like, for me, I can't shut down as Darnell did, shut it down completely, and not not read the news or whatever that may be. But for me, I try at least to, stay informed, and also take a step back and just, take care of myself, work out, and enjoy the outdoor.
Mm-hmm. And what I find so interesting about Darnell's cavalier attitude towards this pandemic is because it automatically has to rub off on Tyra. I'm sure she won't mind me assuming how she feels about it, but in that situation in the plane, if Tyra's wearing a mask and Darnell's not wearing a mask, there's no point for Tyra to wear a mask because at the end of the day, Darnell and Tyra are going back into the same house. Right. So it forces her to also kind of be like, you know what, man, it is what it is. But I was wondering, Darnell, even though you have you're kind of more lax about this than others, when you talked about going out to the beach, playing basketball and all that, are you still doing these things responsibly? Like, are you going out and doing runs, or you're playing by yourself? Do you still find some level of responsibility?
Nobody wants to play with me, man. I'm trying to find someone to play with. Nobody wants to play with me. Actually, you know what?
Man.
Bet Sayel's been hitting me up to work out. So,
are you gonna do it?
I don't know. It depends. But sorry, for those who don't know, I just mentioned somebody a mutual friend that Yvan and I have, because Yvan goes to my church, and he was in my Sunday school class. He was one of the little kids in my class. And so that's how me and Yvan know each other. And so there's another little kid in our church who plays basketball. So I mentioned Betsayel. So he's a kid that I work out with.
Okay, we're
little kid.
Yeah, no, I'm way old. No.
People who don't know.
Yeah.
Betsayel? No, but not me and you, but Betsayel and me, like, you both call us little kids, but Betsayel's
Betsayel's like 9 years old. So he's a little kid. He's
I'm 21.
Yeah. So basically, that kid's been asking me to work him out, but generally, again, I go outside. I go out to eat. I like eating, I go to, me and Tyra like going out. We like going out eating. So the point I'm making is that, and anybody that talks to me about COVID, I'm what's the word? I'm still like, I have this like coach mindset. I got this Michael Jordan complex in that like, I don't like losing.
Strive for their best.
Not in sports, not in life. And I'm very big on off seasons. So Yvan, you play soccer. You know how important off seasons are for you the next season. So Sixth Sense Report is on its off season. So I am preparing myself for being in kill mode when we go back to season 4. And like people are like, oh, that's nice, Darnell. I'm like, no, actually, I'm in kill mode while I'm on break. I'm not watching anything. I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm clearing my mind, I'm relaxing. So when it's time to get on air, hear ye, come one, come all, I'm killing everything in sight, including Joel. Like it doesn't. That's my whole mindset. And if you're not about that, like if you're not using this time to get better, man, I really question your heart as a person. Like if I talk to you and I'm like, yo, Yvan, what are you doing right now on the break? Just watching Netflix and chilling. I'm like, yo, this guy's soft. I can't even deal with him. I can't build with him. You see what I'm saying? If I talk to Abel and Abel's like, yo, actually, no, I'm reading this. I'm working on my push-ups. Because think about it. Once God pushes play on the world, right now, God pushed pause. You just push. Well, what? Speak. God, what? God doesn't push pause.
I would say, under God's sovereignty, the world pushed pause, but I wouldn't say that God pushed pause.
The views of Joel do not reflect Sixth Sense Report and the whole thing. Okay, yeah, no, but the point I'm making is that when God pushes play, we're going back to real life. And just like in the book Outliers, there's unique situations that provide people opportunities to do great things. Michael Jordan is not great in and of himself. Jordan became great because he was prepared for those opportunities that came. These unique situations that provided him an opportunity to get better. So even spiritually, for Christians and my Christian friends, I'm like, yo, are you guys doing devotions with your wives? Because Ephesians 5 commands you to read to your wife. If you're not reading to your wife, you're losing. Forget people dying in the streets because of COVID. Your wife is dying right in your house, bro. You feel me? So when I talk to people, I'm like, okay, so wait, what are you working on right now? Are you working on your wife? Are you working on your relationship with Jesus? Are you working on your push-ups? Right? So that's just been my whole mindset versus being distracted by the depression, the black cloud that's over the world right now. And like I said, when God pushes play on the world and you go back into the world to do your thing, are you prepared to kill people? Because if you're not, you wasted this whole COVID.
And that's so fast because I have a friend, his name's Prince Kamanga. He plays for York University. He just got drafted in the CBL, which is the Canadian Basketball League. And we've been speaking about this all the time. We're like we always say this, like it's one of the main things we talk about every day. We're like, honestly, man, for some people, they're gonna come out of this pandemic and they're gonna be worse off. Like only a few people will actually come out of this pandemic better, especially at their craft. Because Prince and I, since we both got to university, every summer when I get back, we're on a running program. We're running. Him and his brother kind of joins us as well, right? So obviously that's when Prince and I are both running together, that's the only time we could kind of combine athletically because we both play different sports, right? And we train different things. Like we do weights sometimes together, but the running is the main thing we do. And we've been going on a crazy program trying to beat records, especially in the 2.2 kilometer distance, and now we're going to get into the 5K like we always do. But yeah, we just talked about how look, like I feel like this pandemic in a way, like I don't know if it's a bad thing to say this, but it's low-key been a blessing for a select few people who are grinders regardless. Because now, like Darnell, like you said, you're like some people that were on the bench after this, if they're starting lineup, they're starting lineup. So honestly, some people don't strive in this type of environment that we're in, and none of us have been in this environment. But I think the athlete mindset has kind of helped Prince and I during this pandemic as well, because we're like, yo, this is off. Everybody else is in off season, but at this point, like even our competitors are in off season. So now it's time for us to go off. So yeah, the way you explain it, it's like I very much agree.
Yeah, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
I just want to say it's funny. I've been joking. You guys remember when you first show up to school, everyone talks about the freshman 15.
No.
Mm-hmm. It's like the freshmen put on 15 pounds as soon as they show up to school.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I guarantee you, there's going to be a lot of COVID 15.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and
like you've heard people like I listened to TSN Overdrive, and I've heard the guys being like, oh, I've had to become so disciplined. It was so like just always snacking all the time, like just nonstop. Right beside the fridge is something to do when you're bored.
Yeah. And I think Joel and guys, I think so one of the reasons why with the infodemic and kind of withdrawing was that, like, from a biblical perspective, and I was reading an article by Joe Booten, he was making the argument that intellect, people look up to the scholars, to the PhD guys, to the specialists who are making decisions for the country. And I'm sure, Joel, you could speak on that. But the issue is this: intellect doesn't equal wisdom. From the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So people say, oh, yeah, knowledge is power. No, knowledge is not power. Wisdom is power, because wisdom is the application of knowledge. And first, wisdom comes from the fear of God. So just because you're smart doesn't mean you're wise. Just because you got a PhD doesn't mean, you're in a position to be making decisions for the country. Therefore, looking up to these so-called specialists isn't a thing. So for people who are scholars, right? The secular scholar versus the the Christian scholar. The secular scholar and or secular intellectual is governed by autonomy. The Christian intellectual is governed by theonomy. Autonomy meaning law unto oneself, and theonomy meaning a law submitting to God's law as taught by Christ. So part of the problem with intellectuals, just the problem with intellectuals is that you can't measure their ideas. You can't measure their work. You can't hold them accountable. Like if you have an engineer, you can hold an engineer accountable. If he creates something and a building collapses and people die, he's done. You see what I'm saying? But for an intellectual, these guys can just throw around ideas and hypotheses, and people are out here believing them, and the country is led astray, but yet nobody is holding these guys accountable. So that's part of the problem of why, for me, I have not been as entrenched in the information that's being released, just because, again, I don't hold intellectuals to, I don't look up to them. They're not people who I would defer to, and it's just better to practice godly wisdom at a time like this.
And I was listening. I listened to a couple of your episodes in preparation for our conversation, and actually there's one I had to listen to because with Mikhail, because
so shout out to Mikhail. Shout out to Mikhail.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was a really good episode.
Shout out to the homie right there. Stolen, what up, baby?
But and me and him obviously have very different views. But I think if you really think about what he said in the episode,
what did he say?
In regards to how does politics work? And fundamentally, he was talking about it's all about relationships in terms of getting things done. But he also said it's to some extent, and I'm going to definitely brutalize what he said. And
that's
paraphrase.
Okay. He won't mind.
Don't do that.
But when he was talking about being a staffer and having, let's just say the politician prepared, it's all about appearance and optics and communication of message. Mm-hmm. And why I think it's so important to highlight in this realm is neither one of those things actually align with what we as individuals want politics to be.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I follow you, Joel.
Okay, so the business person gets things also done by relationships.
Right.
So to some extent, there's no difference between the politician and the business person in terms of how they get things done. But the businessman makes decisions from those relationships based on merit. Okay, sorry, what's your point? How is it going to better my business? It's not going to better your business. When, as a businessman, when you make a decision based on relationship. No. I mean, use an example, practically, because I'm getting lost. So my point is, politicians make decisions based on relationships. Okay. Business people make decisions based on relationships. Okay. But those relationships, when you make a decision on which relationship to engage in, the deciding factors are fundamentally different. The businessman is based on the merits of the offers involved. The politician has to deal with merits and furthering relationships because that relationship is reciprocal, right? You scratch my back, I scratch yours. The businessman is only going to, I'm not going to scratch your back for the sake of scratching your back. And long-term relationships, it misaligns. And this is where, there's a quote that basically says, when the businessman makes the wrong decision, they bear the consequence. When the politician makes the wrong decision, the people bear the consequence. And so in the realm that we're in right now, you guys were talking about the bipartisanship just being and this is why I bring it up, because, I think the biggest problem with our intellectuals, with our politicians, is literally not doing what you said Abel does. Don't answer. acknowledge you have no idea. Have some humility and acknowledge where we are ignorant, where we aren't. Because there, like, it goes back. What's the other? So what was the other thing I said? Mikhail said, "Oh, it's all about appearance. It's all about, you know, the public perception of that character, not as much about making the right decisions for the people and then convincing them that it was the right decision for them." And if I look at this scenario, you know, the best example of info pandemic and bipartisanship and all of this craziness is related to, remember when this first happened, they were talking about it being highly contagious and highly deadly. Do you guys all recall that?
Yeah.
Those two things are logically incompatible based on the information we had at the time. Like, it was not possible for both of those things to be true. But you talk to any Joe Schmo on the street, and that's what they believe because that's what the news said.
Right. But that goes back to my point about rational ignorance, is that, you know, when they do the cost benefit analysis, it's easier to rely on CP24 or CNN for their information versus digging through scholarly articles and looking up independent journalistic sources. And so it's easier for people to just, and, you know, we have uncles and family members who do that, right, guys? I'm sure you guys have family members who, you know, use WhatsApp. They have the family WhatsApp group, and then they'll be like, "Oh,
I already lost that."
Those are the worst, right? So you have those family WhatsApp groups where there's information coming in, and then your parents or grandparents, they're interpreting that information and getting it there. But of course, Joel, I think, you know, God has blessed you. He's blessed Abel, Yvan, and other people to be able to interpret things for themselves. And Tyra had to kind of, you know, correct me and say, you know, Darnell, you can't be hard in the way people are misinterpreting the information because they might not have the grace you have to interpret information. And so, you know, they just opt out for rational ignorance and rather just have somebody else tell them the information. But I guess that's the whole point of the show of Beyond Culture. That's why Beyond Culture is needed. That's why Sixth Sense Report is needed.
Well, and so I'll take it one step further, and this is something that, you know, would let's say run to the heart of the narratives as you know, questioning. So we know it's more contagious than the flu, right? Like, I don't think anyone really disputes that for the most part. But there was still there was a question about you know, how is it a little more deadly? Is it, you know, than the flu, let's say? And anyone who wants to turn around and say, why are you comparing to the flu? Blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, the flu is still the best starting benchmark that we have in terms of, you know, a number of factors. But anyways, obviously I'm not just running a hard line there. What, you know, bakes my biscuit, in Darnell's words, is we were literally presented information. So the claim of we're worried it's highly contagious and highly deadly, as much as I think they're illogically incompatible, putting both of those as potential hypothesis isn't totally absurd. What is absurd is the way that we were told how much more deadly this disease is. So the simplest example, or simplest, the prime example of this is we were shown the case death rate was 3 to 3.5% in some countries and as high as 6% in other countries. Do you guys all recall that? Does that ring a bell? Does that sound appropriate?
Yeah, I remember those early periods when the death rate was quite high compared to what is known now. Yeah.
Well, but that was the case death rate. They were comparing those 3.5 rates to 0.1% for the flu. 0.1% for the flu is not the case death rate. It is the estimated total death rate, which includes case deaths, over, it also includes estimated number of cases that are not diagnosed. So case death rate is total deaths divided by confirmed cases. Do you know what the case death rate for the flu is?
What is it?
No, man, I don't know.
10%.
And that's is that specific to a country, or it's a worldwide thing?
it's basically worldwide. And I mean, there's a number of reasons why, now I would, when this first happened, I would have said that's probably roughly comparable. Now I wouldn't say it's comparable. And the reason is because, simply put, there's no incentive for someone to test for the flu when someone's died. Or so we have a crazy high number of unconfirmed flu cases and deaths, right? Like the estimated range is 300 to 600,000 worldwide every year in the flu. And that works out to a 0.1% infection, basically death rate. So for those that get infected, 0.1% will die. If we were told, compared to the flu, currently the case death rate, which is our best piece of information, is actually half of the flu, would we be responding to all of this differently?
This is how I would see it. Because originally when it was getting compared to the flu, is because it kind of reacted like the flu. Like people who died from coronavirus would die of acute respiratory syndrome. So it's basically pneumonia. So we see that happen during flu season a lot, right? And fundamentally, I think the first hypothesis, obviously, we've seen that not to be true. But one thing we've seen to be true, and we have to keep in mind, is that the flu, if one person has the flu, you can infect 1 to 2 people. With this virus, you're infecting 2 to 3 people. So I think I would say that's the only thing they really got right in terms of how contagious it was. That's that hypothesis has. And again, everything starts with a hypothesis.
Yeah, Joel, I just want to ask you. I'm not sure I'm getting this correctly, but so is your point that it's not as deadly as it was said to be at the beginning? Because so far we have around 350,000 people who have died from COVID-19, and it's been with us. Depending on where you're looking at. So China, for example, it's been
November 2019.
Yeah, it's been with us but across the rest of the world, I would say, like the first cases started showing up around January to February, right? So if you're comparing it to the seasonal flu or just the flu, as you mentioned, the people who die from the flu worldwide are from 300,000 to 500,000 per year, and that's and we don't take measures as strict as the ones we're taking now against the flu, and so we, in a much shorter amount of time, and in addition to all the measures we're taking, we nevertheless we have 350 people who have died. So in my perspective, the death rate there is still quite considerable compared to the flu. Although we can argue on what information people were getting at the beginning, and there were actually there are difficulties given that the Chinese regime and the things that they did in order to mislead all the other countries and hide the extent to which their country was affected, so there's understandable ignorance there, or failed analysis, but I just want to get your point there, more contextualizing.
Yeah, so I mean, my primary point is there was an aspect of we're being told a story, and we're given information that is literally comparing apples to oranges when you're comparing 3.5% to 0.1%, intentionally to support actions regarding lockdown, right? Like my point is, it goes back to the bipartisanship. It goes back to the political sort of grandstanding that is of concern to me, because it's not as, and it goes, as I said, we don't have, health officials and intellectuals standing up and saying, we have a high level of ignorance, and here's what we know. And when we compare it to, let's call them reasonable benchmarks, it gives us cause for concern. Primary example, like you said, the rate of spread. Now, there's more questions that I would still pose, right? So we say that we know the rate of spread is 2 to 3 people versus 1 to 2, or I think it's like 1 to 1.5 kind of thing. It's really low for the flu, right? And that rate of spread at 3 is obviously of high concern because of the exponential growth that it can cause. The predicament that I perceive is the question. Sorry, this is where I was trying to go. The question is, we say we have confidence in the rate of spread, but we're still getting changing information about how it spreads, and so we probably should be highlighting the fact that, okay, we have no idea how it spreads. Okay, so therefore, here's the various ways it can spread, and here's the various ways you protect against that, right? I think in my opinion, the role of the intellectual class is information. It is not pass down orders from above. And so this is what, the economics part of me, the economic mind goes, how can we truly judge if the lockdowns were effective? For anyone who is pro-lockdown, what information that could be presented to you would tell you the lockdown was the wrong decision? Based on the media, I would say there's nothing.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I agree there. And the point where I agree is the fact that, as you highlighted, is that intellectuals, the role of intellectuals is to provide information and produce, I suppose, knowledge, however confined you can define the term there. However, decision making is not the role of intellectuals in a democracy. We don't live in a full-on technocracy, and there are good reasons why that isn't the case. So if we were talking about the lockdown, for example, and just so if I can step back a little bit, there's a lot we don't know, and a lot of contradictory studies that are coming. So one of the example we can use here is the conversation about wearing masks. And I remember early in one of our episodes, we addressed whether people should be wearing masks, and I was on the side of if you don't need to be buying, especially these more sophisticated and more specialized masks.
You mean fancier, the Gucci masks.
No, like the medical. Okay. Yeah, N95, and if you don't need to be, if you're not outside as often, if you're not working in the front lines, don't go out there. You're just reducing the supply. But the information we're getting about masks is that there were conflicting information there about whether it prevents the spread, and many countries were waiting to get tangible information on research on whether masks are truly efficient, and I think that was an issue. We can't. So when we're facing a situation like this, we cannot always wait to be certain before acting. And I say this because if you look at the responses around the globe, and I think we're going to get more into this, but if you look at the areas of the regions of the world that have been more successful at flattening the curves, or just being able to deal better with this situation, you'll see that so the East Asian countries have been able to contain the situation, although the level to which they're successful is different, but compared to like European countries or Western European countries and North American countries, they've been able to do this better than we have. And part of the explanations, well, some of the explanation is that they've been in similar situations before. We don't, with the SARS and MERS. And MERS before. So in 2003, the outbreak of SARS, even here we had it in Canada, and even the MERS outbreak, so they've been dealing with this before, and they people wear masks more frequently than in Western countries over there, and people are more like hygiene and I suppose social distancing, whatever the term you may use, is better done in the countries such as South Korea or and these other countries. And talking about, so you said that it's not, well, you don't think it's possible to be able to evaluate whether quarantine was successful, but despite the fact that countries countries are different, they're in, they have their individual countries, and they have different situation, different demographics and stuff, but there are patterns that you can generalize, looking, for example, in Europe, so if you look at how Europe has been responding to this, you'll see that some countries responded better than others, especially Germany. Germany has done a better job than most countries in Europe. They have, around 180,000 confirmed cases, in which is quite approximate to what France has, but they have significantly less deaths. So they have 20,000 less dead people there from the pandemic. But I suppose you can analyze the demographics and stuff, but we have data on how fast they acted, so compared to there's this political this website political.eu article that has I think is quite an informative graph. It's just a table of when these countries acted, and it measures. So the value 0 is the day before, value 0 day is displayed when the measure was implemented before the third death caused by COVID-19. So you see, they show after how many days did these countries, for example, suspend all events, close schools, close non-essential shops, and these sort of things. And you can see that the data is not complete, or is not. We don't have enough of it yet, but you can see a pattern.
Yeah, we're still in the middle of it.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. But you can see a pattern of countries that acted earlier and are in a better shape now, if we can, I suppose, if we can try to find data right now, I think Europe is a good case study. So I think I would disagree on whether we can or cannot evaluate whether quarantine has been effective or not.
So I would say that I'm pretty much in agreement with most of what you said, or not, if not all of what you said. But my position about the public not being in a position to judge is that the conversation has become way too narrow. And so that kind of goes back to the original question you had asked me about, where is my criticism coming from? It's not that this isn't something we need to worry about. It's that the discourse has devolved from what's best for society, what's best for us. How do we learn from this? How do we know in the future when is a lockdown appropriate? When isn't it? Sort of the economics terms would be the cost benefit analysis of this. So for me, it's my critique is sort of the way the public conversation has gone into justifying actions as opposed to focusing on sort of net benefit. And I think the simplest sort of example of that would be, how many people were harmed with regards to health and lives as a result of these actions, because we know no action is kind of in a bubble. It has consequences. Simplest example being standard of care for medical scenarios, whether it's timeliness of cancer diagnosis, different things. So I think there's a very thorough, comprehensive analysis that needs to be done to say, okay, what were the unintended consequences of the lockdown? Whereas, I think the things you pointed out and what the media is mostly talking about is focusing on the intended consequence. And so I think that's a pretty decent place to leave the listener. I don't know if you guys want to maybe add a couple more 2 cents. Otherwise, let the listeners know where they can reach you, and we'll do the same for your audience.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great place to wrap up. So where the listeners could reach us is at Beyond Culture TO on Instagram, Twitter, and we're also on YouTube at Beyond Culture. And you can listen to us wherever you get your podcast, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, which is our own website, which is Beyond Culture -Libsyn. So you can find us there. And yeah, that's pretty much where you can find us, if I'm not mistaken, Abel.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And thank you guys for having us. And Joel, I really agree with your last point there. I think it's really important to start doing those analysis, especially now that the cases are going up in some countries and not in others. So we need to prepare for for the future.
And where can they find you guys? You guys, because you guys are currently in, I believe it's in season 4, right?
Season 4.
So you guys are in season 4.
Yeah.
Where can the listeners find your episodes?
So it's sixthsensereport.com. And if you want to get in touch with me, it's Darnell, Dugudda, DOGUDDA _ on Twitter and on Instagram. And then Darnell Samuels on Facebook.
Yeah, and for our listeners, they know, check out our show notes page. I'll have the links to all your guys' stuff. For your listeners, Darnell said sixthsensereport.com. All our social media is at sixthsensereport, sixthsensereport@gmail.com if you want to email us. And I'm TJoelN39 on all social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. So I think we'll probably have a few links in our show notes page. I don't think you guys do a show notes page. So if you guys have any links, send them to me and I'll make sure we put them in our page or on our show notes page as well. So thanks. I appreciate the conversation. I think I think that this type of conversation where we may have some minor areas of disagreement is where more of the public discourse needs to go to actually evaluate, hey, is cases something we should be looking at? If so, why not? Right? Like, what are all the good and bad aspects of the information out there? I think is something that's really missing in the discourse. And I think hopefully the audience likes what we did. And again, thank you guys. And 6 Cents makes change.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was Beyond Culture. Goodbye and good night.
But you heard me? Does that make sense?